Hello, everyone. This is Larry Johnson, founder of the Eight Principles and host of Eight Principles Voices podcast. And I'm delighted to have with me a young man, and he is young to me, who is in Mumbai, a place that I went to last year and thoroughly enjoyed being. And we're going to be talking about how critical the right organizational culture is to achieve the kind of revenue and growth that nonprofits can achieve. So, Abhishek, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Joy to be hosted by you on this podcast.
All right. Well, Abhishek has his own consulting business, but he also is a part of two things: the Blue Ribbon Movement. We can talk about that, and also the co-founder of Wisdom Tree. He's a pretty accomplished young man. He has a McKinsey certification and also an MBA, and so I'm anxious to get started. So Abhishek, can you give us just a little short kind of biography of how you came to do what you do?
Sure, Larry. So I had an early start in the social change and the spirituality space, both. As a school student, I was involved in environment clubs and 1992 Earth Summit, 1995 Enron Dam. Some of these things as a school student, I understood a little bit of it, but it got me started. So it's been several decades since then that I've been kind of exploring the social space. Uh, I had a bipolar disorder diagnosis somewhere in the middle at 25, and I said, now it's time to give all my energy to the social space. So I said, this is it, and slowly moved fully to the social space. Spirituality has been an ongoing thread, and so has business management. So life's a combination of all three.
So there are three things I know you kept when we first spoke. There's the social, the spiritual, and there's one other one. What's
The business, the business. I have done my MBA, worked with corporates, and yeah.
Three things. You know, I don't know whether you know this or not, but I have a theological degree myself. And, spirituality is a big part of what motivates people to be philanthropic. All the studies show that. And when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense because the people who are going to be interested in being philanthropic, they believe in something bigger than themselves, whatever that might be. Okay. It's not just up to them. Now, you told me we had a wonderful discussion about, when I said that, we're in the nonprofit space and we do fundraising, and your ears kind of perked up and you said, oh, well, let me tell you what I've run into. Can you describe to me some of the dysfunctions that you've experienced in nonprofits there in India with regard to fundraising? They're going to love this.
Yeah, I think, Larry, one of the biggest challenges in fundraising in India and in NGOs in India is being stuck in a survival mode, right? Just a firefighting mode where you're constantly just running to raise resources. And before you've deployed them, you're already out of resources. And there's a very reactive, kind of almost breathless way of being that especially leaders of NGOs have, and therefore a burnout, right? So that's one kind of challenge. The other challenge I see is othering, right? Seeing somebody as the other and therefore getting angry about issues and causes and having like kind of an enemy, so to speak, against whom to organize. And so that kind of energy also comes in. So there is the energy of fatigue, there's the energy of anger, sometimes there's the energy of guilt, saying, I'm consuming so much, but my beneficiaries or my partners are not. And is it okay to be materially thriving and abundant? Uh, and for us, our work has been to say that, hey, as a sector, we need to be ourselves in a very creative mindset, in an imaginative mindset, in a mindset of abundance and thriving, if we want to bring that into the world. Because that's the kind of world we can create. And we can create that only when we ourselves are resourced, right? So no point kind of being under-resourced and then trying to create a beautiful world, right? So that's really just acting from that space is a problem, acting from an under-resourced space.
Let's take what you said first about the idea, the feeling that you're always running. Now, do you think that's lack of planning, or are they going about it the wrong way? I mean, or is it both?
There are several factors, I would say, Larry. I think the first one I see is a parent-child relationship between the founder and the team. as if only the founder is supposed to raise resources and the rest of them are just supposed to deliver, versus each person saying this is also my job, right? So each person being a resource generator versus like just the founder. So I think that's kind of one challenge. There's definitely a communication challenge, Larry. So the communication doesn't start from the donor or the donor's values. It starts from what we want to do, right? And that kind of doesn't ring true, that doesn't connect fully. There's also a challenge of seeing things transactionally at times. Nobody likes to be treated like money bags, right? People want human to human relationships. They want to kind of deeply be connected, right? And in the speed of networking and conferences and all, the human to human connection at times doesn't fully happen. So some of that also tends to be there. And lastly, I would say culture of martyrdom, like a culture which overvalues, going all out, sacrificing, burning out, and so on. And just as a culture itself, can a culture of an organization be something that's enriching versus depleting? So I think cultures also play a role. So yeah, so several things. I think all these act together.
I see all of these things in nonprofits in this country. First, you said that it's the founder's job. Well, here it's often the fundraiser's job, and nobody else gets involved in it. It's to use an American West metaphor, it's like hiring a gunslinger to go in and clean up Dodge. It's one person's responsibility, not a team. See, that's the first mistake, and we see that here. Okay. And then you mentioned about this idea of being a martyr, a poor as me, I'm da 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 da. We see that here. Oh, why should I be doing any better? It's somebody else's fault. And then the whole idea that, well, I'm going to come at you as an organization. I'm not going to draw you in. That sets it up as, pushback right there. And then, as you said, treating donors like money bags. Is that what you said? Money bags?
Hmm, hmm,
Well,
hmm,
here another metaphor we like is the ATM, automatic telling machine, just put the card in, get the
hmm,
cash out.
hmm.
And there's no real relationship. We see the same things here. And then one other thing I wanted to push into, and I think we don't see this as much here, but this idea of angst over against. It's always me against something else, and I saw a little bit of that when I was in India too. So these are the things that you're seeing. Um, you know, Indians are very generous people, Abhishek. Um, they're very relational people, and they're very spiritual people. Um, and so they all the elements for effective philanthropy are there. They're all there. But the nonprofit organization is often getting in the way of making this happen. Um, so tell me, can you give me like pull from your experience, and you can choose any kind of example you want, but I'd love to hear a story of how your intervention went in and made a positive adjustment on the culture of an organization or even a company that you worked with. Can you do one for me?
Yeah, I could share with you about one of India's largest volunteering organizations, and they wanted to further scale up, but the founder was very clear that they don't want to scale up using rules. They want to scale up using culture. They don't want to enforce, but they want their organization spirit to kind of grow. Typically, when we go into an organization, we first listen to the whole system. We see what the system is aspiring to. We deconstruct the culture and kind of put it back together, saying what kind of a culture will take us to the next level. And we get all the core team on board to do that. When we looked at the culture, we saw that there was no data. So to an extent, people didn't know. I mean, they knew estimated numbers, but they didn't really know what was going on. There was no active donor management. It was just ad hoc and organic, and it had reached so much even at that scale. There was no thought leadership, even though there was so much in the system that it could come out as thought leadership and so on. Several systems were missing, and the culture and system link was missing. The systems were impersonal. The culture was kind of espoused culture was there, so it was all disintegrated. We worked with them over more than 2 years through several rounds. And we worked in a way that was speaking to their culture. So we didn't come in with our framework as much as work with them through their collective wisdom to see what is it that they aspire for. So we did workshops, we did on the field work, we worked with smaller teams, we designed learning and development, culture document. So we were working through and through. What we saw over a couple of years was several things. One is the engagement scores going up. So the team itself feeling more satisfied at work. The second that we saw was volunteering itself increasing. So the scale of volunteering increasing. We saw thought leadership. So actually conclaves being organized with donors, and the use of data starting to happen and adoption of data starting to happen. So a lot of foundational pieces which were missing in this organization started coming in, and it all kind of started moving into a positive spiral, right? And I would love to say it was all great, but there were always challenges also. So there are always some unpredictable things that hit the system, but the system's resilience was solid. It could deal with some of these external impacts that happened, which were outside its control, regenerate itself and get on. So I think we also built resilience, right? So that was kind of where the system is right now,
You know,
way more advanced than what it was 2 years ago. Yeah.
see, you take a very different perspective than I'd say 80% of attempts to raise money. And that's good, okay? Because you before you did anything, you went in to address the culture of the organization. That's the first thing you did. Because unless that's right, simply adding more tools or techniques or training people to do XYZ is only going to have a minor impact on the outcome, if any. Um, when you've worked with, I'm curious to know what you think about this. When you've worked with organizations, one thing we see here with nonprofits, and I'm sure it's the same with for-profits, is what I would call an over-reliance on technology. And what I mean by that is, these CRMs, the data platforms, prospect management platforms, donors screening, all that sort of thing. And now the latest buzzword, AI. Okay, that nonprofits tend to over rely on these things, and they tend to overbuy on them. And I'm sure it's the same in India, where the business model for these tech platforms is to add services or features, raise the price. Add services and features, raise the price. That's the business model. All right. So what unfortunately often happens, and I want you to address this in India, is that you see a lot of nonprofits or organizations which are not that sophisticated, especially when it comes to what technology can and cannot do. And they tend to buy things that they really don't need. And the metaphor I use, Abhishek, is they're selling Ferraris to people that need lawnmowers. Okay. Or maybe they're selling Ferraris to people that need, oh, what's the name of that little taxi, the little man that's in the, what do they call those things in India?
The rickshaws, the tuk-tuks, the
Yeah, yeah.
rickshaws.
Oh yeah. So they're selling them race cars when they really need something like that. They don't need anything.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
as
yeah.
you know, the streets of Mumbai, and all but the major thoroughfares, some high-powered car is a liability. That's a lot. You don't
True,
need that
true,
to get
true,
around.
true,
In fact,
true, true.
it could be injurious to your health. So, and by the way, Abhishek,
Yeah, yeah.
I would never try to drive in India. I had drivers the whole time, and it was really fascinating to watch the traffic rules there. And I'm like, okay, here we go.
True, true. It is very subjective. Yeah.
I love it.
It can
It's
be very subjective.
subjective. The rules are subjective. Oh, we'll do it this way, or we'll do it this way. Um, so,
It's a little
talk
bit
to
of
me
this.
about
Yeah, yeah.
nonprofits' love affair with technology, or are they better consumers of technology in India? Probably
Yeah,
not.
Larry. So in my experience, one is of course there's a spectrum of NGOs, and there's a bunch of NGOs that are very primitive or very early stage on technology, and then there are ones that are more sophisticated. So there's definitely a spectrum. What I have seen are two, three things, right? So I have seen the new technology advisors in India and orgs that are coming that kind of advise organizations to be very basic in their technology use.
Oh,
So
really?
in fact, yeah, so there in fact the encouragement is to not build anything new, but use what is already available. You go very step by step and be very matter of fact in the sense of using WhatsApps and Google Forms first before trying to use sophisticated stuff. So I would say there's also a bunch of orgs who says that.
So there are organizations that stress starting slowly. Now,
Starting slow, starting small, starting simple. So that kind of advice is also going around.
really, because so are these
Yeah, yeah.
consultants, or I mean, who are these people that stress this?
These are consulting organizations that are generally consulting NGOs, and they're I think they're not tech companies. They're more NGO consultants,
I
right?
wouldn't
So
think they were
yeah,
tech.
so yeah,
That's not
yeah, yeah,
a
yeah. So there is that also. So I don't know if the tech market in the NGO space in India is as matured as the US. I would say it's not yet. It's still yeah.
well, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because I can't, off the top of my head, I cannot name any consulting agency or individual that would go in and stress small, simple. I mean, I do, but I sometimes I feel like I'm a voice crying in the wilderness, really. And part of that
Mhm.
is because uh, tech companies here have, in some ways, co-opted consultants because they offer them referral agreements and this kind of thing, and they give them a platform for webinars and to build their audience. So they've sort of co-opted them to do that, and I've done some of that myself.
Mhm.
But that's fascinating that they really work on that because, and I'm going to date myself here when I say this, but when I first got into this business, Abhishek, and we would do a major campaign, I did it on 3x5 cards, not even a computer. It was done on file cards. Okay. And you can,
Mhm.
some of these youngsters, I say that and they kind of give me this, really? You can really do that? Yes, you can really do that. So, anyway, but so, what do you think? I get the what do they call that? It's the big report they do every year, DASRA report. I get the DASRA report on philanthropy in in India, and I also am friends with the senior partner at this organization called Social Lens, who's also in Mumbai, and they're tracking these numbers about growth in philanthropy, and it's really growing. It's really blossoming, and then this new this new law about the 5% set aside for all businesses that has to go into a nonprofit, and then they eliminated all the trap doors so that it's a little more directed than it was before. Um, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing Indian philanthropy?
What is the biggest challenge? Wow. Uh, Let me see which is the biggest one. I mean, there are several
Well, you can have
challenges,
more
but
than
we have
one.
some really awesome.
You can have
No, I think no. I would definitely preface it with saying we have some really awesome and visionary philanthropists.
yes, you
Many
do.
of them, in fact, come from tech companies, and the way they choose to support, the kind of unconditional support they give, and the long-term backing they give for various things is quite awesome. So I want to say that yeah, we're blessed to have some really good ones. Yeah,
Tata's a perfect example of that. Uh,
yeah.
the original Mr. Tata is the single largest philanthropist in the world by money given. I didn't even know that
Yeah,
until I was
yeah.
going there. So yeah, you're right. So go ahead.
So I think one is that many of the super rich are not as much into philanthropy as the rich. And I remember reading this, and I think it validated by my experience that if you look at India's top 10 richest people and the top 10 philanthropists, they do not match. Because there's a bunch of people who are there who can definitely do much more in philanthropy. And I think to me, that layer and tapping that layer's philanthropy would actually have a solid ripple effect, right? So I think to me, the biggest challenge would be how do we get India's richest to contribute much more to the philanthropy space. And by richest, I mean the real richest, right? The top 0.1 or 0.01% of the rich. So I think to me, we've not been able to unlock that value. And I don't know why. Maybe we've not made philanthropy cool enough. Maybe we've kind of, yeah, there's a lot to be done there because I just see the amount of value that can get released by this small group of people being able to give a percentage of their wealth. Because, yeah, I think to me, not being able to touch that group, get them going, I think, yeah. So I would say that that's where a lot of value lies untapped.
Well, one thing that I've noticed here is that people want to be involved because it gives them, they get to do something they can't do otherwise, or they get to participate in something they can't buy. All right. So these people at the top level, they can buy pretty much whatever they want. Okay, that's not an issue. Okay. So then, in order for them to feel as though they're having a real impact, it has to be presented to them in that way. And then the other thing I've noticed, Abhishek, is in this country, we have a pretty broad base of givers, meaning percentage of the population that makes gifts. And one of the things that people with real wealth want is they want to be a part of a team, and they don't want to be perceived as financing most of this at somebody, somebody else. Americans would say we don't want freeloaders, or we don't want what we call, no one wants to be a quote sugar daddy. In other words, somebody just dishing out money with no real expectation of any kind of return. And that may be playing into there. I mean, how broad is giving in India? I mean, I don't really know. I mean, in terms of the general population, I know some of it's gifts in kind, and they do service and that sort of thing. But in terms of even a small monetary gift, how broad is that?
Yeah, no, I don't have numbers offhand, Larry, but my guess would be it's much lesser than the US. Because another challenge or another thing worth thinking about is how do we look at religious donations and social donations in the same way? Because there's a lot of religious giving, but can social work also be seen as a form of religion or service, right? Because that is also God's work. And I think another challenge, if I have to name, is how do you redirect or how do you expand the funding from just purely religious giving to only temples and churches? So from there also it flows to the needy. So I don't know if those numbers get captured. Like how does that money flow from religious institutions to the needy? But I think there is something there also to be said that Indians giving beyond their own religion or their own caste or their own community to the larger world. How do we get that out? So I don't have numbers often, but I would say that's also a challenge or something worth building on.
I know that giving to religion here is a pretty significant factor. I think it's the single largest chunk, maybe about 30%, 35, 40% maybe, in terms of monetary value. But here's what I've discovered, though. Let's go back to the profile of the person who's philanthropic, and being a part of something that's spiritual is a part of that, is that part of that profile. So then what you're saying is, okay, how do we use that? They already inclined. All right. How do we use that to generate more momentum? Now, let me posit a possibility for you. If the nonprofit organization, and this is rare in this country too, it's not just India, can really reach out to these people, your individuals, as potential investors, and show them how investing in this is going to satisfy the values they're looking for, then the organization then becomes the facilitator, not the actuator. See the difference I'm making? It's a subtle difference,
Mm-hmm.
but see, you're the OD expert and you understand the difference of what I'm saying. You see,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's probably this way in India as well. Nonprofits think pretty highly of themselves. and,
Yeah.
and sometimes I tell people, you're just going to have to get over yourself. Okay. This isn't about you per se. And, oh, but I've got all this great. Well, that's fine. But you need to understand it's not really about you. And I think the metaphor that was shared with me once is sometimes nonprofit leaders want to be the star in their film. Well, sorry, it's the donors that are the stars. They get the screen time, or should. All right. And you can produce it, you can direct it, which in many ways is a more powerful role than getting the screen time. But still, that's that mental shift that has to take place. Would you agree with that,
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah, I mean, the way I'm listening to it, Larry, is also don't give money to us, but give money through us, right? Like let money flow from us to where your values need to go. And we are the conduit. The NGO is the channel through which that money flows to where it needs to, right? And it's you who's at the center of this. So I definitely think so. I think working in the NGO space, one can end up on a very moral high ground, lot of signaling, lot of belief that, the Messiah complex saying, I am the savior, and that flip to saying that hey, I'm an enabler and I'm, like you said, not the rock star or the film star of the movie. I'm trying to make this happen. It is the cause which is at the center, not me. It's not my story. I think some of these subtler shifts uh, take a lot of individual and collective work. Individual work by the leader, but also collectively for people to see themselves as really channels of work happening through them. So I think there's definitely value in what you say. And just one last thing I would say is that there are unconscious hierarchies that people have in their heads about them being above or below each other. And I feel if we can truly tap into equality and dignity of all the actors, right, that everybody has a part to play. And how do you let each person play their part fully, without trying to jostle them and trying to be. I think that would create a beautiful fabric, and that's probably a better vision of the world rather than just one star kind of. Yeah. So I think something like that.
Well, I would agree wholeheartedly. There are no unimportant roles, and there are no insignificant gifts. Um, and what I've said when I work with people here is large gifts drive scale. You have to have those. All right. But the smaller gifts give you legitimacy in the community, you see. And if you've got no legitimacy in the community, even if you've got big money, it's not going to do well for you in the long term. It just won't. But then if you don't have any big money, you've got nothing but small givers, you're going to always struggle. So it really takes both going together. It really
Absolutely.
does.
I think, in fact, I would say that the small gifts carry a spiritual energy. So, in my own organization, for example, the volunteers have a sacrifice wallet where they sometimes skip a coffee and put the money into the sacrifice wallet and saying that, okay, this is my contribution, having sacrificed something. And I feel like that money, those small gifts that come from those small, small sacrifices also carry a spiritual energy,
Oh yeah.
almost like a blessing that goes with it, and that energizes the cause. So I think there is definitely a spiritual energy around money also.
One thing, I love that. And one thing that I tell people, I said, it's not about equal amount, it's about equal sacrifice, you see. And for some people, even a small thing is a great sacrifice. For others, it has to be much larger. Now, you when I was there, and I keep forgetting the name of this. When I was there, my Indian friends introduced me to something called, was it some sort of special coffee or something, and it's served in these little clay cups. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Kullad chai or
It was coffee, but it was just in a little clay cup, and
filter coffee or okay.
yeah, and they called it something, and they even sell it on the side of the road, and it was delightful. It was delightful, and I must tell you a little story. And I see that you went to school in Bangalore. It was the morning we left Bangalore and went to Delhi, and it was an early flight. The gentleman that does all the organizing, he loves early flights, so it's always the first one out in the morning. Okay, we're up, and we're there, and plenty of time, and we're having breakfast there in the airport, and the gate that we're going to depart from is sort of behind me, just right over there. Plenty of time, and we're having breakfast, and there are four of us. Me and the other American that came with me, and then the two Indian gentlemen, and and I'm really enjoying this coffee. It's my first time to really enjoy it. And the my American partner and one of the Indians got up to go to the men's room or whatever, and we're just talking. And I said to Ravi, I said, well, I'm looking at the clock. I mean, shouldn't we kind of be walking over there? Oh, no problem, no problem, no problem. And I'm like, okay, fine. So then I just got. I said, well, this is great. I'm finished. So then we walk over to the departure lounge. Okay, there is nobody in the departure lounge. The sign is saying final boarding door closing. And I'm going, oh my, in this country, it's like, oh, great. So we walk up, and the guy that's the gate agent says to me, because somebody had been over there to talk to him, did you enjoy your coffee, Mr. Larry? I did very much. And he does this, and we walk onto the plane, and they close the door behind us. That would never
Wow.
happen in this country, ever. And
Mhm.
we get on, and our other two partners going, where the heck have you been? We've been sitting here waiting for you, and everyone's on board, and we think we're going to leave. I said, that's a story I'll never forget. But
Mhm.
I thought, oh my goodness, we're never going to make this on. And we just walk on. They close the door, and we go to Delhi. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
I think that's a thanks for the story, Larry. I just want to quickly share that this whole relational fabric and this whole contextual way of being, where there is context. I think one of the strengths of our society is that things are contextualized and they're not stripped away from context. And I feel that creates a rich field in which these kind of small, beautiful things can happen.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't think we value it enough, but it's a rich place to be in.
I really love that. That could do great wonders with the whole idea of a contextual format within fundraising. See, there you go. As I learned later, what uh, excuse me, what Sachin had done, he went over to the gate agent and said, I have an American friend. This is his first time in India, and he's just enjoying his coffee. Can we wait a few minutes? Oh yeah, sure, fine. So it was all set up before I went over there, and Robbie took me, and it was so stunned. The guy knew my name. Oh, Mr. Johnson, thank Mr. Larry, and so, but I love that context. It's not in ice. It's not a gift given in isolation. It's a gift in context, and the whole spiritual element, and I love, and the whole idea of the spiritual power of the small gift, that it carries a special blessing with it because it comes with real sacrifice. I love that. I really, really love that very, very much. Um, so, so is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to bring up?
I mean, yeah, a couple of things, Larry. I think I loved your work and how it almost seems to bring a very nice Western and Eastern blend of things. While it originates from the West, I feel it has a very Eastern flavor to it. And I relate to it because a lot of what we are trying to do at Wisdom Tree is also be integral, bring the best of what, so to speak, modernity. When I say West, I would kind of say, okay, what modern ways and what traditional or indigenous ways have, and how do you combine both of these to reach the highest potential. So I think I found I found that the ring there, the humanizing, right? It's almost like also what I heard you say, or whatever little I've seen your work. It is not about being transactional, but about a human to human connection.
Yes.
And again, for us, a lot of our culture work is just evoking humanity in people. The belief that people want to do good things and they want to work together, but they sometimes get very frozen, transactional, survival mindset. So how do we unfreeze that, right? And how do we bring in context? How do we bring in warmth and let things flow? So I could see a lot of parallels in our work, which is also why I was drawn to it, saying, hey, here's somebody who's not doing a how to market better kind of a thing, but really how to do this from a much deeper space, I think. And I really appreciate the depth from where you do things. I think anything at surface level doesn't last as long as when done from depth. So just want to acknowledge that. That I think is something I really relate to in your approach as well. And that's what we try to do at Wisdom Tree as well. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Well, my emphasis has been on sustainable revenue. Anyone can raise money one shot, all right, some more than others. But if you're going to sustain something over time, it requires a different perspective, as you said. And then the whole idea that you are this idea that you're building a system that comes from the inside out. It's not transactional. And I love the part where you said it's Eastern Western. Now, I'm a Christian, and people often think of Christianity as a Western religion, but yet it originated in the Middle East. Christians were in India from the very beginning, almost, and so and the Bible, especially the Old Testament, is very much a Middle Eastern book. It comes with Eastern knowledge and an Eastern perspective. And I think a lot of my friends, are Greek thinkers. They don't understand that, Abhishek. They're linear thinkers, one, two, three, four, five. And as you know, Eastern thinkers think in circles and outgrowing. So it's a different way of looking at life, and I find it fascinating. But yeah, that you picked up on that. Thank you. I mean, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And just one last thing, Larry, was I think I wanted to share the other thing, which was the whole idea of resourcefulness and abundance. And I feel like nature has abundance. When a
Yes, it does.
tree flowers, it is full of flowers and it's full of fruit. And I feel we are also extensions of nature. So I feel like abundance is very innate to human beings: creativity, imagination, playfulness. And again, I see your work evoking some of that. Instead of just being an operational mechanical worldview, I see it embedded in a very, yeah, I see it embedded in a more playful, imaginative worldview. And again, that's something that I appreciate and relate to as well, because that's something we try to do as well: evoke the sense of imagination, sense of abundance, the sense of thriving. really. So yeah, I think that we joined in the intention that may our sector thrive and may the world thrive.
Yes.
So yeah, so relating
Well,
to that also.
there's definitely enough resource there. There's not a dearth of resource. The dearth is in engaging it in an effective way.
Yeah.
Um, well, this has been delightful. I've really enjoyed this. And I want to tell the audience that we're on that you're doing this when it's kind of like late evening for you there in Mumbai. And I appreciate your willingness to do it. It's there Mumbai is 11 hours, 30 minutes from where I'm sitting. So it's a little later. It's in the evening. But and I hope to come to India, if not at the end of this year, certainly the beginning of next year again. It could be toward the end of this year. And so, Abhishek, thank you very much for taking your time.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, and it's a privilege to be hosted by you. So thank you so much. It's a joy. It was delightful.
Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And very soon we'll have somebody else who also has a very unique and inspiring story to tell. Thank you for listening.